Ethan Morgan was 12 years old the first time he truly understood what it meant to be poor. Before that, he only sensed that his family's apartment was smaller and more worn than those of his friends, that his clothes were never brand new, and sometimes carried a musty smell from a thrift store. But he hadn't known shame, not in a deep, painful way. That changed on a crisp autumn day in 7th grade, when he asked his mother if he could join a friend's birthday outing to the new arcade downtown. She'd hesitated before giving him $5, everything she could spare, slipping it into his hand like she was handing over a secret. The next day at the arcade, his wealthier classmates blurted out how they had spent triple that amount on snacks alone. Overhearing them, Ethan felt a hot flush of embarrassment. $5 was all he had, and he tried to make it stretch, refusing to play more than a game or two. He pretended that he didn't really like arcades that much, offering up excuses, telling everyone he wanted to save his skill for the day's final competition. But none of it held back the knot in his stomach or the realization that he was different. That difference followed him the way a faint odor of stale food might cling to worn-out clothing. Even at such a young age, he started noticing how teachers sometimes looked at him with pity, offering him extra pencils or notebooks without being asked. It was well-intentioned, but it only highlighted what he lacked. As the years in middle school crawled by, he became acutely aware of every brand label missing from his t-shirts, every pair of cheap shoes that wore out within months, every phone that was always a hand-me-down model from an older cousin. Worst of all, some classmates began to tease him for it. It started with subtle comments about his outdated phone and grew into open mockery about how he must be wearing invisible brand clothing. There was no single moment that marked the beginning of his torment. It was a drip, drip, drip of small humiliations. Yet the effect was just as potent as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water on his head each morning before class. Throughout 8th grade, Ethan developed a habit of walking quickly through the hallways, head down, hoping he could avoid the searching gazes of those who thought they were better than him. Sometimes he daydreamed of a life where his father still had steady work and his mother didn't have to piece together part-time jobs that made them look just all right on the outside. In the privacy of his room, really just an alcove off the living room separated by a thin curtain, he pictured himself older, wearing suits or maybe commanding a large office, or driving a car that cost more than some people made in a year. He kept those fantasies hidden in the deep folds of his imagination, fearing that voicing them would somehow jinx any chance they had of coming true. It was easier to keep his dreams small and his footsteps quiet. When high school began, his life changed in ways he both feared and anticipated. He stepped into those wide hallways hoping for a fresh start, but it wasn't long before his old reputation clung to him like a stubborn stain. The stress of new teachers, more demanding classes, and the awkwardness of early teenage social hierarchies piled onto him, leaving him feeling more isolated than ever. It didn't help that he was now surrounded by some students who showed up in fancy cars their parents had gifted them, sporting the latest sneakers that cost hundreds of dollars. One of these students, a kid named Chase, took an immediate dislike to Ethan. Chase was the kind of boy who never had to worry about the price of anything, flaunting crisp clothes and a flashy smile that radiated confidence. Though they had never shared a real conversation, Chase seemed to sense Ethan's vulnerability as easily as a predator identifies wounded prey. Ethan had tried to avoid him at first, but the school was only so big. One Friday, in the crowded cafeteria, Ethan noticed an apple rolling on the floor. When he bent down to pick it up, he realized it was too late. Chase's expensive white sneakers kicked the apple before Ethan could grab it. Juice and pulp splattered across the floor and onto Ethan's sneakers. Chase shrugged dramatically, as though it was Ethan's fault for getting in the way. Eyes turned to them, curiosity in every gaze, especially from a group of cheerleaders nearby. Chase threw up his arms theatrically and said, "Hope those weren't designer sneakers, Morgan." The laughter that followed drilled into Ethan like a set of needles. In that moment, the cafeteria's echoes of amusement and the smell of greasy pizza and disinfectant fused into a single wave of embarrassment. Ethan's cheeks burned. He just wanted to vanish. That incident was only the beginning. Chase and his small circle of equally privileged friends started taking every opportunity to embarrass Ethan. They'd make sly remarks about how Ethan never joined in on Friday pizza orders, how he wore the same hoodie day after day. When winter rolled around, they poked fun at his scuff boots, chanting that maybe Santa would bring him something from a real store this Christmas. Ethan tried to ignore their taunts, focusing on the reason he came to school in the first place: to learn. He took refuge in math problems and English essays, trying to lose himself in the comfort of textbooks. He spent more time in the library than anywhere else, forging an alliance with a pile of books that would never judge him for how he dressed or how much money he didn't have. As the bullying escalated, he found himself dreading the morning bell. Each day, he would lace up his worn sneakers with a silent vow: just endure, just make it through the day. His parents were not blind to the changes in Ethan's behavior. They noticed how he was quicker to snap, or how he often kept himself locked in his alcove, feigning homework when he was actually trying to tune out the painful hum of his own thoughts. They tried to help. His father, who had been laid off from a factory job a year earlier, would tell him stories of his own youth, how bullies rarely grew up to be anything special, how the best revenge was living a successful, honest life. Ethan appreciated the attempt at comfort, but he couldn't help feeling that these were just words. Words wouldn't stop the embarrassment that crawled up his spine in the cafeteria. Words wouldn't replace the emptiness in his wallet when he passed by the vending machines. Words wouldn't buy a new pair of shoes. The first true breaking point came on a day that seemed entirely ordinary. Ethan had woken up groggily, dressing in the only clean jeans he had left. They were too short, showing a peek of his socks. At school, a charity drive was being announced, a canned food and coat collection for those in need. On paper, it was a noble cause, but as soon as the principal began describing families struggling through winter, Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He slumped in his seat, conscious of how easily he could be part of that group in need. Sure enough, Chase whispered loudly, "Hey, Morgan, are you donating or receiving?" There was a ripple of stifled laughter. The teacher shot them a warning glance, but the damage was done. Ethan felt a wave of anger, so intense he thought his chest might explode. No, he told himself, don't sink to his level. However, that day was different. The school was hosting a pep rally. During the rally, the principal asked for volunteers to come down to the gym floor for a silly, staged relay race. To Ethan's horror, his own name was called out, alongside Chase and a few others. As Ethan made his way down, he could almost feel the heat of 1,000 eyes on him. The relay involved putting on oversized pants and jackets, then running to a cone and back. When it was Ethan's turn, the pants slipped from his waist, revealing tattered boxers that had been passed down to him by a cousin. The entire gym burst into laughter. He tried to pull them up, fumbling in panic, but the spectacle was too juicy for the crowd to ignore. And as he glanced across the gym, he spotted Chase doubling over with laughter, tears in his eyes from how hysterical it all seemed. Ethan wished the floor would swallow him. It didn't, of course, and he was forced to endure the rest of the relay with cheeks burning. By the time he slunk off the gym floor, the memory was already cemented in the minds of every classmate around him. A humiliation on that scale felt catastrophic, especially for someone whose life was already woven with smaller, quieter humiliations. The next day, he found it impossible to make eye contact with anyone. The laughter echoed in his mind, even when the halls were silent. For the rest of the week, he dreaded each new conversation, worried that somebody would bring up the memory of him stumbling around with those oversized pants. No one knew that the boxers he wore had a tiny tear in them, carefully stitched up, which made the situation feel even more embarrassing. Strangely, it was that mortifying moment, that unintentional exposure, that sparked a change inside him. He'd reached a point so low that he felt numb, almost as if he had nothing left to lose. In that numbness, he found something unexpected: resolve. It was like a switch flipped in his brain, whispering that if he could survive that level of humiliation, maybe he could survive anything. Slowly, a plan began to form, initially just a daydream, a mental escape from the reality he faced each day. He thought about ways to earn money, real money, so he wouldn't be stuck wearing clothes that never fit or living in a cramped apartment where the rent was a monthly struggle. Maybe he would mow lawns, wash cars, or babysit. Anything to pull himself up, to keep from drowning in the pity he saw reflected in teachers' eyes. He started small. After school, he put up flyers for odd jobs around the neighborhood, raking leaves, walking dogs, washing cars. At first, the offers trickled in slowly, with neighbors who recognized him from the bus stop or who remembered seeing him in the local grocery store. Word spread that he was reliable. When he raked leaves, he didn't just do a cursory job. He gathered every single leaf. When he walked dogs, he made sure to treat them as if they were his own cherished pet. Ethan discovered that as menial as these tasks might seem, the sense of purpose they gave him was anything but small. Each small tip he collected felt like a building block toward something bigger. The older he got, the more he realized that being poor had taught him an unexpected set of skills. He was resourceful and determined, never wasting time or money he didn't have. While other kids might spend their afternoons hanging out at the mall, he spent his time trying to expand his side gigs. The dream of escaping the shackles of poverty drove him forward, day after day. He tried not to think about Chase too much, but occasionally he would overhear stories about Chase's new sneakers or a lavish birthday party. Each mention reminded him of the gap between them, and each time, his resolve hardened a bit more. By sophomore year, Ethan was earning enough to help his parents buy groceries. They were astonished and slightly concerned that their son was taking on so much responsibility, but they also saw that it gave him a sense of pride. His father's unemployment checks had dried up, leaving the family even more strapped for cash, so his father picked up a temporary job as a night janitor at a warehouse. That meant the Morgans often missed each other in passing, as if they were characters in separate stories that only intersected briefly at dinner or when leaving notes for one another on the kitchen table. Yet through it all, Ethan's determination only grew. Every time someone told him he couldn't do something, he absorbed the sting and transformed it into motivation. School continued to be a daily battlefield. Chase's bullying hadn't let up. If anything, it became more creative, more targeted. He'd make remarks in class about Ethan's clothes or his hair, or even the slight wear on the corners of his notebook. Even so, by junior year, Ethan developed a thicker skin. He had weathered so much that petty insults from a spoiled bully no longer stung as deeply. In his free time, Ethan delved into the internet, discovering forums where people discussed their homemade business ventures, flipping sneakers, trading collectible items, reselling electronics. He spent countless nights watching tutorial videos on how to code simple websites, how to open an online store. Though these tasks seemed advanced, his mind was hungry for the knowledge. One day, while browsing online listings, Ethan had a stroke of inspiration. He saw that people were paying ridiculous sums of money for limited edition sneakers. Some pairs sold for twice or triple their retail cost. He thought back to how he'd always envied the kids at school with the newest Jordans, noticing they seemed to cycle through them like it was no big deal. He didn't have the capital to buy such shoes at retail, but he had an idea. If he could offer a service to clean or restore these expensive sneakers, maybe he could tap into a market. The plan required minimal investment, just cleaning products and the willingness to put in elbow grease. He started small, advertising online, and among the few classmates he dared to talk to. Surprisingly, a couple of his peers jumped at the offer. They handed him their scuffed, stained shoes, trusting him to bring them back to life. Ethan, meticulous by nature, spent hours studying cleaning techniques, trying out different solutions. His first few customers were amazed at the transformations. Word spread slowly, but it spread. In the midst of all this, the bullying persisted. Chase would see Ethan carrying plastic bags of shoes in the hallway and bark out remarks like, "Hey, got more garbage to carry? Or can you shine mine for a discount?" Often, Chase would crack jokes about how Ethan was just a glorified shoe shiner, mocking him for groveling to earn loose change. Yet those remarks, designed to sting, only fueled Ethan's determination. If Chase's circle of friends was mocking him, that meant word was getting around. Over time, Ethan's sneaker restoration gig blossomed into a real operation. He learned how to handle delicate materials, how to fix minor rips, how to apply protective coatings to keep shoes looking fresh. His tiny bedroom closet became a makeshift workshop filled with cloths, brushes, and special cleaning solutions. By senior year, something unexpected happened. Ethan noticed that his classmates who teased him before about his old clothes now sought him out to ask if he could help them snag limited edition releases or restore newly purchased secondhand sneakers. Ethan embraced the irony. He recognized that many of these kids had no idea how to navigate online drops or auctions. They simply had the money to pay for the results. He began acting as a personal shopper, waking up early to join online queues or scour secondhand markets. Each successful flip or restoration padded his savings. It was still far from enough to make him rich, but it was a meaningful chunk of money for someone who had grown up with so little. Every dollar he earned, he split between helping his parents and reinvesting in his fledgling business. His father, noticing the spark in Ethan's eyes whenever he talked about his next big idea, gave him subtle nods of approval, though it pained him that his own hardships had contributed to Ethan's sense of desperation. Ethan's mother would sometimes tease him gently, saying, "Don't go forgetting your old mom when you're a millionaire." He'd smile at the absurdity of it. He could barely imagine having $1,000, let alone $1 million. But a seed had been planted. While his side hustle grew, so did his academic responsibilities. He spent sleepless nights juggling homework and entrepreneurship. Some weekends, he would collapse onto his bed from sheer exhaustion. But the more he succeeded, the more unstoppable he felt. He learned to keep quiet about his growing income around classmates, worried that flaunting it would make him a target for theft or, at the very least, more bullying. But the truth was, the money coming in wasn't just petty cash anymore. He had managed to accumulate a few thousand in profit, a stunning amount for someone who started with nothing. The knowledge that he had built it himself, through grit and perseverance, made him feel alive. It was late in his senior year that everything came to a head. The school's annual talent show was happening, and they were allowing entrepreneurial showcases for the first time. Students could present a demonstration of a business idea rather than a traditional talent. Encouraged by a teacher who admired his hustle, Ethan signed up, seeing it as an opportunity to pitch a broader concept for a sneaker restoration and resale app. He spent days perfecting a rudimentary prototype, teaching himself enough coding to demonstrate how users could list shoes, track cleaning services, and manage online transactions. On the night of the show, the auditorium was filled with parents, siblings, and teachers. Ethan stood backstage, trembling with nerves as he watched the act before him, a girl singing an emotional ballad. Suddenly, his name was called. As he stepped into the spotlight, he felt the lump in his throat threaten to choke him. But then he saw his mother and father in the front row, beaming at him with pride, and something in him steadied. He began to speak about his journey, carefully avoiding direct references to being bullied, but weaving in the difficulties of financial struggle, the importance of perseverance, and the thrill of building something out of nothing. He demonstrated his sneaker restoration techniques right there, showing before and after photos. Then he pulled up his app prototype on a small projector screen, explaining how it could revolutionize the way students in their community bought and sold sneakers. The crowd was initially skeptical, but the more he spoke, the more they leaned in. By the time he finished, a roar of applause erupted. He even spotted a few of his classmates, the ones who used to whisper about his old clothes, clapping in genuine surprise. In that moment, Ethan felt a surge of energy, a glimpse of how life could be if he continued this path. He left the stage feeling more confident than ever. But of course, not everyone was impressed. Chase was in the audience, arms folded, rolling his eyes as if to say that Ethan's big dreams were nothing but hot air. That silent dismissal might have once shattered Ethan, but now it simply bounced off him, leaving him unscathed. A few days later, the school's social media pages lit up with messages about Ethan's demonstration. Several students asked if they could invest or partner with him, words that sounded almost absurdly adult for a group of teenagers. A local business owner who happened to attend the show reached out privately to learn more about Ethan's idea. Excited and terrified, Ethan arranged a meeting at the business owner's small office downtown. The man turned out to be open-minded, impressed by Ethan's drive. Though the meeting didn't result in a large investment, the man offered something arguably more valuable: mentorship and advice. He explained the basics of forming a legal business entity, managing finances, and eventually seeking larger investors. Ethan soaked up the knowledge like a sponge, scribbling notes in a worn notebook. Graduation arrived faster than Ethan expected. To no one's surprise, Chase delivered a speech as the school's star athlete and golden boy. The speech was polished, well-rehearsed, and surprisingly charming, even if Ethan suspected it was mostly for show. After the ceremony, students milled around, hugging, crying, promising to keep in touch. While many were looking forward to a final summer of freedom before college, Ethan was contemplating his next move. College was a dream, but so were the thousands of dollars in tuition that he didn't have. Scholarships seemed like the only route. He applied to every scholarship under the sun, hoping his good grades and entrepreneurial spirit would land him something substantial. Then, fate intervened. Through his continuing hustle, he caught the attention of an online reseller community that had grown quite large. They saw potential in his restoration services and invited him to partner with them in launching a more robust platform. They offered a modest but meaningful seed investment, more than anything Ethan had ever imagined. It was enough for him to pay for his first year of in-state college tuition and still have capital left for the business. It felt surreal. He remembered the times he rummaged through couch cushions for spare coins, the times he had to wear thrift store clothes that smelled like someone else's life. Now here he was, signing an agreement that gave him real funding. His parents cried tears of joy when they heard the news, his mother practically speechless. Even his father, who rarely showed overt emotion, embraced Ethan and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, son." With this new financial backing, Ethan officially formed his own company, Shoe Cleaning Restoration, and an online marketplace that connected buyers and sellers, streamlined by an app. He spent the summer after high school graduation working tirelessly on the platform, enlisting the help of a couple of tech-savvy friends and outsourcing minor coding tasks when they got stuck. Orders started flooding in, first from local communities, then from out-of-state sneaker enthusiasts who discovered the site through social media. Each positive review boosted their visibility, creating a snowball effect. Ethan learned about marketing, branding, and customer service on the fly. Sure, he made mistakes, botched an order here, miscalculated shipping there, but each lesson helped him refine his approach. By the time he entered his freshman year of college, the company was growing steadily, although it wasn't making him a millionaire yet. His new dorm room felt palatial compared to the tiny alcove he used to sleep in. He still felt like an outsider among peers who seemed so carefree about finances. While they partied and explored campus nightlife, Ethan buried himself in spreadsheets and code. But something incredible was happening. He started to see that the skills he developed from being poor, resourcefulness, grit, humility, were exactly what made him stand out in the business world. Professors took notice. Some offered extra guidance, intrigued by a freshman juggling a growing startup. He landed a spot in a prestigious entrepreneurial club on campus, where he networked with other ambitious students. And that's when the unexpected twist revealed itself. One afternoon, Ethan received an email from a potential investor who had seen his work online. The investor praised the concept, recognized its potential for scalability, and asked for a meeting. The name on the email was Mark Emery. Ethan didn't think much of it, beyond the usual excitement of landing a potential investor. They set up a face-to-face meeting at a cafe near campus. Ethan arrived early, sipping coffee nervously, going over a mental pitch. When Mark Emery walked through the door, Ethan's jaw nearly dropped. Standing beside him was none other than Chase, clad in an expensive polo shirt, looking just as smug as ever. It turned out that Mark Emery was Chase's father. The meeting began awkwardly. Mark greeted Ethan politely, explaining that he'd discovered the business through social media buzz and found the concept promising. He acknowledged that his son had attended the same high school as Ethan, but seemed oblivious to the tension between them. Chase, clearly uncomfortable, sat with his arms crossed, hardly meeting Ethan's gaze. For a split second, Ethan considered walking out. Why should he even consider taking money from the father of the boy who had tormented him for years? But then, as Mark began to talk specifics about his interest in equity, about the potential growth, they were speaking a language of opportunity that Ethan knew he couldn't dismiss lightly. He decided to maintain professionalism. Keeping his personal history with Chase out of the conversation, Ethan laid out the company's numbers and future projections. Mark asked detailed questions, clearly impressed by Ethan's thorough knowledge and passion. Chase remained silent for the most part, only occasionally interjecting with short, clip remarks. As the meeting wrapped up, Mark looked between them and said, "I've never seen my son so quiet." Clearly, Ethan, you've got something going on here that has us both fascinated. Chase's expression soured, as if he wanted to deny any fascination, but he said nothing. They agreed to a follow-up discussion to go over contract terms. Before parting ways, Mark offered his hand to Ethan. "I can't promise a final decision," he said, "but I'm leaning strongly toward investing. Let's schedule another meeting soon." The handshake felt surreal, as though Ethan was connecting with a world he had once only dreamed of. The irony wasn't lost on him. The father of his worst bully might be the key to taking his business to the next level. After Mark left the cafe to take a phone call, Ethan and Chase were left alone. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Chase finally broke the silence, clearing his throat. I didn't know my dad was meeting with you. He just told me to come along for a business discussion." "I had no idea." He paused, looking for words that didn't come easily. "Look, about high school. That was all I was just messing around." Ethan felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, disgust, pity, and maybe even a glimmer of understanding. He remembered the nights he had cried himself to sleep, the times he felt worthless because of Chase's taunts. Part of him wanted to explode, to lay into Chase with all the pent-up rage he had carried. But somehow, looking at Chase now, uncertain, awkward, he realized he no longer needed that confrontation. He had already won, in a sense. So he took a breath and said, "You hurt me. A lot. But I'm not the same person I was back then. I hope you're not either." Chase's eyes flickered with something akin to regret. Before Ethan could decipher it further, Mark returned, ushering them away. Over the following weeks, Ethan wrestled with the moral dilemma of accepting Mark's investment. The money in mentorship could expand the business drastically, maybe even catapult it to national or global prominence. But was he willing to tie his fate to the man whose son had made his life miserable? Eventually, he recognized that holding onto past resentments would only chain him to the bitterness of his old experiences. If Mark was serious about helping him grow, Ethan decided he would accept that help and do it on his own terms. After thorough negotiations, he signed an agreement that allowed Mark to invest a substantial sum for a minority stake in the company, ensuring Ethan retained majority control. The influx of capital transformed everything. With the new funds, Ethan was able to hire dedicated developers to refine his app, rent a small office space, and even launch targeted marketing campaigns. The business scaled quickly. Sneakers were just the beginning. They branched out into apparel, accessories, and eventually established a secure marketplace that gained nationwide traction. Articles popped up in technology blogs, praising this young entrepreneur who had come from near poverty to helm a rapidly growing startup. Ethan balanced his college coursework with the demands of a company that was beginning to resemble a legitimate enterprise rather than a shoestring operation. The next big turning point arrived in Ethan's sophomore year, when a major venture capital firm caught wind of his company's success metrics and user growth. They expressed interest in a sizable investment, one that would solidify the platform's position at the top of its niche. Negotiations lasted months, but when the deal finally closed, the valuation of Ethan's company soared. Overnight, the shares he held became worth a figure beyond his wildest dreams. On paper, Ethan Morgan had just become a millionaire. He was stunned. All those nights sleeping behind a threadbare curtain, all those times feeling like an outcast in school, all the humiliation. It was as if he was looking back at a life that no longer belonged to him. Yet the memories of poverty never left him, nor did the small voice inside that reminded him how quickly fortune could change. He knew money didn't erase the past, but it gave him a power he never imagined. The power to help himself, his family, and those around him who were still struggling. He paid off his parents' debts, moved them into a comfortable townhouse, and made sure his father no longer had to work overnight cleaning floors. The first time he handed his mother a bank card linked to a special account just for household needs. She burst into tears, hugging him like he was still her little boy. News of Ethan's success traveled fast, reaching back to his old high school. Some classmates called to congratulate him. Others asked for jobs or investments. But the one call that truly made Ethan pause came from Chase. At first, Ethan thought about ignoring it, but curiosity won out. When he answered, Chase's voice sounded hesitant. He admitted that his own post-high school life hadn't panned out as he'd hoped. Injuries ended his athletic scholarship, and he was struggling in a low-paying job. The arrogance Ethan remembered was gone, replaced by uncertainty. Chase asked if there was any possibility of joining Ethan's team, even in a small role. The request felt like a cosmic reversal, a stark reminder of how fortunes can shift. Ethan didn't relish the idea of working alongside Chase, but he couldn't deny the sense of moral responsibility tugging at him. Perhaps it was part altruism, part closure. After discussing it with his team, he offered Chase an entry-level position. Their interactions were cordial, though not exactly friendly. Over time, Ethan witnessed a different side of Chase, a young man who had been raised with everything, only to lose it and discover that he had no coping skills for failure. In his own way, Chase was now the vulnerable one, learning humility in real time. Slowly, they built a cautious understanding, if not exactly friendship. As Ethan's company continued to soar, more media outlets reached out. An in-depth interview request arrived from a prominent business magazine. The interviewer asked about his journey from poverty to prosperity, curious to know how someone so young developed such resilience. Ethan told him the truth about the years of scraping by, the humiliations in high school, and the spark that drove him to create something valuable. He didn't name names, but he spoke candidly about how certain bullies had lit a fire in him. In a poignant twist, he admitted that without those hardships, he might never have developed the grit to succeed. When the article was published, it ignited a wave of positive feedback, especially from young readers who saw in Ethan a role model for overcoming adversity. Messages poured in, some from teenagers stuck in similar situations, poor, bullied, feeling hopeless, and they thanked Ethan for showing them a different path. One by one, he responded, encouraging them to find their own spark, to take small steps that might lead to big transformations. For him, the greatest triumph was knowing that his story could give someone else the push they needed to believe in themselves. The tension in his life began to ease, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Yet a new fear crept in. What if I lose it all? That question kept him grounded, driving him to continue working hard and not become complacent. He explored avenues of philanthropy, setting up workshops to teach financial literacy and entrepreneurial skills to underprivileged youth. He saw his own younger self in those wide-eyed kids, feeling a pang of nostalgia mixed with determination to make their journeys a little easier than his had been. During a quiet moment in his office one evening, Ethan reflected on his improbable rise. The walls around him were decorated with framed newspaper clippings and snapshots of his early hustle days. The homemade flyers he once posted around the neighborhood, the battered shoes he had restored, the original code snippet for his app. Each artifact told a piece of a larger story, reminding him how every trial he'd faced had contributed to his current success. The memory of that gym floor humiliation surfaced, the laughter, the searing embarrassment. The boy who'd stood there, pants sagging and cheeks aflame, seemed a world away. And yet, that moment had been the catalyst, the spark that set everything else in motion. Then came a moment that felt almost scripted by fate. His old high school invited him back to speak at a student assembly on the topic of overcoming challenges. He wasn't sure how he would feel walking those hallways again, but he accepted. Standing at the podium, looking out at a sea of young faces, he saw the same fear, hope, and curiosity he once carried. He spoke about perseverance, about finding strength in places you never expected, about turning pain into fuel for ambition. He avoided painting his journey as something magical or effortless. He told them it was hard and lonely at times, that he sometimes cried himself to sleep, that he made mistakes he thought he could never fix. But he also assured them that none of those obstacles were final. His words rang with sincerity, and the students, who were used to cookie-cutter motivational speeches, seemed to lean forward, truly listening. At the end, the thunderous applause felt like a healing echo, perhaps washing away some of the painful memories etched into those school walls. When the assembly was over, teachers and students came up to shake his hand. Some asked for selfies or business cards. A few confided their own struggles, tears in their eyes. And in the corner, Ethan saw a group of kids wearing scuffed sneakers, the same type he used to wear, looking at him with a glimmer of hope that reminded him of his younger self. He whispered a silent vow to keep paying it forward. As he made his way toward the exit, he passed the trophy case where he once watched Chase's glories overshadow everything else. Now those trophies were dusty relics of a time gone by. He felt no bitterness, only a deep, resonant gratitude. Before leaving, the principal, who was new and didn't know much about his past, thanked him warmly. Ethan paused to take in the moment. Then he turned and walked out the door, stepping into the sunlight with a renewed sense of purpose. In the days that followed, Ethan's life returned to its bustling pace of board meetings, brainstorming sessions, product releases, and philanthropic endeavors. Yet the moral of his journey anchored him, that life can break you down, make you feel small, and strip away your dignity. But it can also be the catalyst that pushes you toward greatness if you choose to harness your pain. His story was a testament to how every insult he'd endured had indirectly fueled his ambition, how every scarcity he faced taught him to be creative and unyielding. When he finally sat down to recount his past in a personal journal, therapy of sorts, he noted how surprising it was that gratitude overshadowed anger. He was grateful to his parents, who, despite their own struggles, had given him love and a foundation of integrity. He was grateful to the neighbors who hired him for odd jobs, to the online communities that believed in his hustle, and even in some strange way, to Chase. Because without that constant bullying, without that drive to prove him wrong, Ethan might never have discovered the depths of his resilience. It was a delicate truth, but a powerful one. The journey wasn't over, of course. Business brought new challenges, the economy shifted, competition rose, and personal relationships evolved. But Ethan carried within him a sense of hard-earned confidence. He had faced the dark side of humiliation and learned to turn that darkness into light. Where once he was a boy who lowered his eyes in the hallway, afraid to meet the judgment of others, now he could lift his head high, anchored by the knowledge that he was enough, that he had always been enough, despite what anyone said about his old shoes or thrift store shirts. In the end, the story of Ethan Morgan wasn't just about a poor teen who became a millionaire. It was about the triumph of spirit, the unbreakable human capacity to grow through adversity. Walking away from the past that once haunted him, Ethan chose not revenge, but success. He chose not bitterness, but generosity. And in doing so, he discovered that true wealth wasn't just about a number in the bank. It was about the person you become when you refuse to let the world tell you who you are. That final realization became the lighthouse guiding him forward, reminding him that when life pushes you down, sometimes the only place left to go is up. And when you climb with compassion in your heart, you don't just elevate yourself. You lift others right alongside you.